Several music theory channels I watch, seemingly independent of one another, are advancing a similar idea, namely that there are no wrong notes in music. This is interesting. I've structured this episode to work through a set of questions and ideas, hoping to engage with and to an extent weigh in on this new direction. Here's how we'll approach the topic. 1. What do people mean there are no wrong notes? 2. And what is a wrong note anyway? 3. Is this the apex of a more is more philosophy? 4. What are or aren't the stylistic features of this approach? 5. Defending a newfound freedom? 6. Weighing in, defining wrong differently. 7. The rule we can't break. And then finally 8. The conclusion. Generally, when people say that there are no wrong notes, what they mean is that for any apparently wrong note played, even during an improvisation, we can reimagine a modified musical context that accommodates that note, welcomes it into a new style, a style defined in part by its inclusion. In the new context, this note becomes musically plausible, and sometimes distinctly definitive. It's all about context, is the motto here. And to a large extent, all of this simply makes good sense. Still, some questions remain. Right or wrong in what sense and to whom? Whose rules are we overthrowing when we defy the old idea that there are wrong notes? Against what do we justly rebel? And what does wrong itself mean? Something aesthetic, surely. It can't be morally wrong, for example, to deploy an untimely C sharp. To be less esoteric, a little more down to earth, the obvious answer is that wrong, to many trained musicians, simply means that once we commit to a context, say C major, assuming no secondary dominants, borrowed chords, etc., that the diatonic notes, the white keys on the piano, are in. The other notes are out. Again, we can inventively spin off exceptions, chromatic passing tones, and so forth, but here we have possibly the main idea. From this standpoint, what the no wrong notes theory adds might be better described as no wrong context, or no right context, or possibly in practice, no fixed context. We have, as it were, a double freedom. We can, on the one hand, freely choose any notes, and on the other hand, freely alter the musical landscape they inhabit to always make them feel somehow at home. As I mentioned earlier, I watch a lot of music theory and music education. You could go for a G7, but why not spice it up with a flat 9? But we're always spicing it up. Can I try it once without the spice? I may be wrong, but the goal in music education sometimes seems skewed to me toward a more is more approach. And if more is more, all of the notes would seem to be the ideal number. That is, if more is more, then surely all is most. Besides, harmonically, the flat 9 is an A flat. If this isn't the wrong note in the context of G7, which note precisely is? From this harmonic angle, it's easy to see how no wrong notes emerges directly and probably inevitably from jazz. But jazz is not only more, it is also stylistically simply different. Maybe my underlying complaint in all of this is that a serious defense of the unreasonable effectiveness of accessible harmonic styles and very playable melodic gestures is too infrequently taken up, at least formally. Whether I'm thinking of a simple riff I like, or of Beethoven's Fifth, the question that occurs to me isn't how could I ever write or play at such an uncommonly high level, but rather, how is it that such absolutely basic melodic ideas are so powerfully affecting? how can we define the stylistic features of this approach? It's not a return to the serialism of 100 years ago, that should be said. That is, it's not committedly atonal, though atonality presumably is not forbidden. Given though in practice the examples I've heard are somewhat tonal, and the fact that it's drawing on unlikely non-chord tones, the implications might seem to be inevitably only more jazz. But perhaps not rigidly so. For example, unusual key changes might also accommodate unlikely material that have little or nothing to do with jazz conventions. In the end, the question of style remains mostly unspecified because the parameters are so agreeably open. The whole thing really is best characterized as a defense of music as context, rather than as the specification of any particular context. On the other hand, if it's difficult to define what exactly the style is that derives from this slogan, we can be definite, I think, about what it is not. For example, it's not the sound of the major scale or the minor scale, or the pentatonic, because, let's use the pentatonic, here is a context in which there are 5 conventionally right notes. So logically, any demonstration that there are no wrong notes coming up against this convention means pentatonic plus 1, at least, something added and arguably wrong, then demonstrated not to be. Extending this idea, the philosophy, for now, seems to need an existing convention it can freely rework. Therefore, it's in some sense unclear whether it refutes or requires convention. As an approach or an improvisational tactic, the idea that there are no wrong notes has produced beautiful results. Yet, as a rule, as currently stated, there are no wrong notes, it seems to quietly assert that those working by choice within a genre, or a fixed form, must be doing so only because they have not yet received word of their emancipation. Their pardon now secured, why should they stick to their cell? Maybe I assume the implications, but what the slogan seems not to endorse, certainly not to celebrate, are the merits of sticking by a limited palette of notes, as, say, Clapton might have in his early blues playing. It's presented as a freedom, but as we've observed, if practically enacted, there's something it forbids. If there is no wrong note, then there is no defensibly right context. This might help to overthrow undesirable constraints, but it seems with Clapton an out-of-step concern. Was this what was happening in a band like Cream? Had they not found freedom? Thinking long on music and subjectivity has left a lot of open-ended questions, but also attracted me to some fairly fixed conclusions. One of these conclusions is that from the artist's interior vantage, for them, picking the right notes, the ones that work, probably means only picking the notes they like, or even the notes they love. In this sense, the wrong notes, though wrong is a hard-edged word, are simply the notes they didn't use. Another way to say all of this is that in music, as in literature, finding your own voice is key. But finding your own voice might mean nothing more than accepting your own taste. That act might be soul deep, but it isn't complicated to describe. Let me be concrete again. Dylan's A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall contains only 3 chords, I think. Some slash chords maybe, open position, capo, drop D. Inversions, yes, but ultimately just the 3 major triads. It's played on acoustic guitar and presented unflinchingly and minimally. Now, imagining the slow introduction of the least likely non-diatonic tones into this context, and further the changing of the musical content to accommodate these new and unlikely notes, raises different kinds of questions for me. Are there no wrong notes in this context, aesthetically? How do these new notes feel, suggesting what new direction? Relating to the lyric, how? And how many such not wrong notes can we add before we are in a new style, a new genre? What might be violated here by no wrong notes seems not to be a simplistic conservatory stricture, but the artist's own self-determined choices and deep personal style. Both the melodic and the harmonic material are dramatically limited, true, but they cannot be characterized as constraints from the outside unchallenged. These are constraints from the inside, consciously preferred. The way there are no wrong notes is discussed reminds me somehow of a statement I heard too frequently in high school, that poems don't have to rhyme. No, I suppose they don't, nor do they have to have meter. But if you want the effects of meter and end rhyme, and why shouldn't you, you simply can't get them by abandoning meter and rhyme. It depends, I guess, on what you want. And that's where the real hard rule comes in. We can choose as we like, but we can't freely choose the effects associated with our choices. Yes, to get back to music, there's no rule that you can't write your bass line in odd meter, something other than 4/4. There's no rule that you must constrain yourself to the range of standard techniques. Certainly there's no rule you must stick to the major pentatonic. However, there is a rule that if you adventure maximally in all these areas, it won't sound like, give the felt effect of the bass line for My Girl. But that rule isn't enforced by the conservatory or any governing body against which we could plausibly rebel. There are no wrong notes, at best, establishes the philosophy of music as context and introduces radically new approaches in, for example, improvisation, context chasing melody rather than melody constrained to context. Yet, to endorse truly maximal freedom, we must also affirm, I think, that the 5 notes of the pentatonic, unaltered and with no additions, are also not the wrong notes. In brief, poetry doesn't have to rhyme, can't tacitly mean it shouldn't if you're sufficiently developed as an artist. That is, if you know you're free. In my view, artists like Clapton and Dylan were famous for being themselves. Their distinctive constraints somehow did not seem to support this trivially. Stylistically, I guess I have my own taste. But along with it, no pronouncement, no vindicated manifesto justifying what I think others ought to prefer, simple or complex. I like, to tell the truth, even love the experiments I've heard in No Wrong Notes. I only warn that the proverb, no one size fits all, turns out to be true, even when the proposed size is unbounded.